Well, thanks everyone. So, my day job is I run a small think tank at the University of Ottawa, devoted to housing. We've since changed our name to the Missing Middle Initiative. So we're so new that we don't even have a new slide deck yet, or at least a new template yet. But a lot of my job, I talk to three groups, and about a third. So a third of my group job is talking to housing policy nerds, of which I am one. And we speak our own language and we see the issue one way. Next group is politicians. I live about a kilometer from Parliament Hill. I used to work for the federal government, so spent a lot of time talking to public servants, talking to politicians and so on. They have another worldview and another language. And then finally I talk to industry, and that's everyone from home builders to people in finance, insurance, and so on. Again, they view the issue differently, have their own language, and so on. So, my job is more, I think, of a translator than anything else. So what I'm going to do here as a guy who is in the Ottawa bubble, now visiting Toronto, is try and translate how the problem is viewed up there to this audience here. So, if we look at, I'm showing Ontario here, but we could show graphs for other provinces and have similar but not identical trends. So we've got basically three housing types, or at least three markets. So the first in this kind of purple color is freehold. So this is ownership housing, housing starts, non-condo. And this peaked around 2002 in Ontario, and has declined since then for a variety of reasons: increased development charges, the growth plan, lack of zoning reform, and so on. So we've been in kind of a secular decline when it comes to freehold housing starts. And in fact, I don't have the graph going back far enough, but I think last year was the worst year since like 1958 or something like that when it comes to freehold starts, despite the fact that we've had record population growth. The condo market has been, has its ups and downs. Unfortunately, we know that particularly in GTA and GVA, not a lot going on. There are still some starts, but that reflects where the market was in 2021, 2022. So we know we're going to have 2 to 3 to 4 not so great looking years. Rental, on the other hand, has, we've seen a steady increase, and a lot of that is due to public policy over the last decade. CMHC programs like ACLP, eliminating the GST on purpose-built rental, accelerated capital cost allowance. And it is I think, one success story that doesn't really get noticed because there's so much other problems going on and our population grew so much. But this is an area where I'd argue that actually public policy has been remarkably successful. But overall, if you look at the market here, or you look at what's going on, and again, we could look at Ontario. If I put it BC, it would look similar. You've got one of the three is in secular decline. One of the three is pretty much crashed, and rental's growing. But even that might have some issues. Well, that's going to be a problem when we hear the federal government say that we're going to double housing supply, double housing starts, when two of three of these are moving in the wrong direction and moving sharply in the wrong direction. And to again put this in an Ontario context, we have a provincial housing target from the provincial government here in Ontario, 1.5 million homes over 10 years, and they kind of have annual targets to hit that. That's in this gray color here. And the kind of teal color and the pink color is what we've actually had for housing starts, and what is projected. That projection was in the provincial budget just last week. So these numbers are, I'd say they're from the province themselves, but they get these from Bay Street, from some of the folks in this room. You'll note that those lines are nowhere near each other. Now, I would suggest that the housing target may be a little bit overkill because it was designed at a time when, before we had changes to immigration programs, before we had changes to international student programs. But we still need, even if we ratcheted this down, the target down somewhat, we're still nowhere near. So this is a problem. This is a public policy problem where we've got governments who set one set of targets, but you read the tea leaves, you see what's going on, and we're going to go nowhere near. I spent my public policy career, I spent doing work on climate change. It's the same thing. Like, I feel like I haven't changed jobs. I just cross out emissions and put housing starts and want up instead of down. But otherwise, it's the same thing, where governments are really good at setting targets and not so good at making the tough decisions to hit those targets. And it's caused an issue around affordability. So we have this score we call the WHAM Housing Affordability Score. And what it is basically it looks at how many weeks of income would an individual, a median earning individual, have to save up to pay for a 20% down payment and the first 5 years of mortgage payments on a 5-year fixed mortgage. So it's a nice metric because it incorporates wages, it incorporates home prices, and it incorporates mortgage rates. And the good news is, and we've got data thanks to TREB going back to 1967, the good news is that we are moving in the right direction as far as affordability goes in the last year or two. The bad news is that we have a long way to go when it comes to affordability. That we saw big increases after the financial crisis, big increases during the pandemic, and the cost curve is starting to, or the affordability curve is starting to curve, but we got a long way to go to get back to affordability levels of 10 to 15 years ago. The prices are just too high, and we just don't have enough supply. And we can think of this issue as being one. I'm sure Brad Jones is going to use this term because I think I stole it from him. But there's a real cost of delivery crisis, right? That in this country, we have problems basically building housing, and that could be private sector, that could be public sector, that could be social housing. Doesn't matter. We have a real issue of having the costs aligned with affordability. The costs are just too damn high. That's development charges, that's taxes, that's approvals, that's land costs, and so on. So until we address what West Group calls the cost of delivery crisis, we're never going to solve this. That we're just, what's going to happen is, yes, prices go down to a point, but then at that point, if you don't address the cost of delivery crisis, nothing gets built. And we're kind of seeing that right now in the condo market. So, and the other thing, and I don't want to get too political here, but it may be a little bit, but I'll try and behave. There's this idea out there that what we could do is basically say, well, we don't need prices to go down. If we just keep prices stable for a while, wages will go up over time, and that will create affordability. We can create the conditions where, because if you think of a price to income ratio, there's basically two components of that. You either need the price to go down or the income to go up. So one of the things we looked at Missing Middle Initiative, and you can see our report on this, is, well, what if our goal is just to return to a price-income ratio of 2005. We look at every market, but I'm just showing about 8 here. So, okay, here's what was the price-income ratio in 2005. And in Oakville, it was about 6.2. St. John's, it was about 2.9. And this is for a single-family home, the Korea single-family home metric. December 2024, we can see that the PI ratios there. They're about double what they were in 2005. So then we do a thought exercise. We say, okay, let's assume we're going to keep prices stable, and we'll have nominal wages go up about 3% a year, which is what they've done since we set a 2% inflation target 30 some odd years ago. Well, if we do that, it will take about 25 to 30 years in some markets to return to affordability if we put all the weight on income growth. And that's assuming that we can keep prices stable for 25 years or somehow. So that's not going to get us where we need to be. I mean, it might, St. John's, yeah, 7.6 years. Okay, yeah, that's doable. But, 27, basically 27 years of income growth and flat prices to get affordability in Kitchener-Waterloo to where it was in 2005. So that basically means if you've got, if you've got the eldest cohort of millennials, they will be collecting their pensions by the time affordability runs around. They will be over the age of 65, if that's our plan. So I'm going to suggest that cannot be our plan. We've got to find a way to, address the cost of delivery crisis and create affordability. We can't just let wage growth take the way here. So now we look at, I'm going to look at public policy environment. Left lots of time for questions because I always find the Q&A really the most interesting part of this. So if we look at freehold ownership, right, so non-condo ownership, there is a surprising lack of public policy thought, particularly from the federal government, on how to advance this. Province is thinking about it a little bit. The premier talks in these terms, talks in the, having a white picket fence and a $500,000 home. So the province thinks about it, and I would argue advanced some policy on this recently. But we're not getting a lot of deep thinking on how to restore the dream of home ownership, particularly in this type of market. And the GST cut, that is the one policy area or the one policy idea that the federal government has to address this is let's cut the GST for first-time home buyers. We'll set a cap on it of $1 million, maybe $1.5 million. That's going to do nothing in this market, in the GTA in particular, for freehold ownership, because the number of first-time home buyers of that type of new, and the GST only applies to new homes, right? So the number of first-time home buyers buying that type of house in this market is a rounding error. It's basically zero. So the federal government's flagship policy on this is amounting to next to nothing. And there is an opportunity here. We had a provincial budget here in Ontario. The province could help with this a little bit by cutting the PST or increasing the PST rebate. They haven't, but it's an idea that's still out there. On the condo side, again, you guys live and breathe this more than I do, a sort of policy wonk within the Ottawa bubble, but we all know that this is going to get worse before it gets better, right? Just because, housing completions lag housing starts lag pre-sales, and pre-sales are just generally not happening because there's so much unsold inventory. There are some policy wins that could happen. Provincial and federal focus on multi-unit development charges should help. If we can get those taxes down, that helps the pro forma. It should help some projects pencil. You still need to get the approval side right, which is still a mess. But focus on streamlining approval should help. And I'm going to make an argument here which has not made me popular in Ottawa, but I don't do this job to be popular. I actually think that the GST rebate that the federal government has now, or that is proposed, is actually going to hurt the condo market, is actually going to cause starts to go down. And the reason is this, that again, the policy is that for first-time home buyers only, you're exempted from GST on a new home between 1 and 1.5 million. And what we're hearing, we're trying to actually, talk to millennials. We do, little focus groups and things like that. They're actually worried about burning their eligibility here. And they're like, we want to save our first-time home eligibility when we buy that 3-bedroom house, right? We don't want to burn it buying a 1-bedroom condo. We would rather rent. So it might be good for rental, but this is a big thing, right? Because if it goes up to 1.5 million, in the GTA, which it could, there's talk about in Ottawa, that's $75,000 off the price of a new home if it's 1.5 million. First-time homebuyers don't want to burn that eligibility. So by limiting it to first-time homebuyers, the government is strangely actually disincentivizing first-time homebuyers from buying certain types of homes. There's a really obvious fix to this. Don't limit it to first-time homebuyers. Open it up to everybody. We've been suggesting this as a policy forward because in so doing would actually help first-time homebuyers because then they don't have to worry about burning their eligibility. But what it also does is it makes it more attractive for seniors in family-sized homes to downsize, go buy a new condo, move into that, and that frees up the suburban home for the next generation. All right, so we're hoping that we'll see movement from the federal government, that the federal government kind of realize that, yeah, maybe we're being a little bit too cute here by limiting the eligibility, and we'd just be better off broadening it. And they could keep the eligibility the same as it is now for the existing GST rebate, just change the numbers, just change the thresholds. They'd probably be better off doing that because I really worry if they go on this path, they're going to find that if anything, this is going to make the problem worse, not better. And then on rental, now I just kind of crapped on the federal government. I'm going to say some nice things. The government is really focused on the rental side. It does seem to be keeping the federal government up at night. It kept the Trudeau folks up at night. It seems to be keeping the Carnegie folks up at night. And they really are making a good faith effort, I would argue, to increase rental stock in this country. So not only do you have all of the policies that they've done over the last 10 years, again, like eliminating GST and purpose-built rental, like accelerated capital cost allowance, all of these other things, they're now introducing more policies, like resurrecting the old multi-unit residential building tax provision of the 1970s, which is one where small-scale investors can kind of pool their money, build, typically it's smaller mid-rise apartment buildings, and then deduct some of some of the operational expenses against their personal income taxes. That should really help. I think there is still more that they have to be doing. I think, one of the things they have to think about is where, yes, getting the private capital on this helps, but on both the rental side and the condo side, I think they really, they keep talking in terms of attracting private capital without really thinking through, okay, well, where is that capital going to come from, and are we creating barriers to that capital? Right? I think we would be better off as a country by saying, like, instead of trying to keep out foreign capital, why don't we attract foreign capital, but say, okay, we'll allow foreign capital in, but it's got to be towards the building of a new housing. It's got to be additive to the housing supply, right? So trying to channel capital a little bit more than saying, okay, this capital is good, we'll allow it, this capital is bad, we'll ban it, which I would argue is not having the intended effect, and at a time where we need as much capital as possible to help build housing supply, we shouldn't be putting up all these barriers, right? We might want to steer that capital a little bit, but we shouldn't be putting up barriers. And one of the challenges I think we're going to see on the rental side, and it comes back to the cost of delivery crisis, is that rents are falling, which is a good, or at least in some markets, rents are falling, which is a good thing. A lot of that's driven by reductions in immigration levels, and particularly reductions in non-permanent residents. Unless you address the cost of delivery crisis, you get to the point where rents get too low relative to the cost of making new build, and you're not going to get new rental supply, right? That market locks up. So unless you address that, the cost of delivery crisis, you probably do end up getting a plateau on the rental market side. So I wanted to leave lots of questions, so I'm going to open up the floor. If you want to see what we're up to, so if you click on this QR code, it takes you to misslingmiddleinitiative.ca, and you can see all the fun stuff we're working on. So open the floor. I know there's going to be mics around. At least I thought there was mics around. There we go. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the demographic shift that's going to happen over the next, say, 10 to 20 years and what impact that will have on single-family detached homes, but also on, maybe folks who have been living the majority of the last, 20, 25 years in apartments?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it tends to be a little bit overstated. There's a belief out there, and it has kind of existed for about 20 years, that once all the baby boomers, hit a certain age, it's going to free up all of these homes. And that's true to a point. But there's two other points I would make. That one, that kind of assumes that the population otherwise is stable. And we've historically been a country with fairly high immigration rates, right? So as long as the population keeps growing. And then second of all, I actually don't think we're going to see as many of those homes hit the market as people believe. I think we're going to get a lot of inheritance. There's a lot of kids, and particularly grandkids, who are living with parents. I think a lot of those homes will end up getting inherited, right? And when you see statistics, StatCan came out with this. There's something like 30 some odd % of people between the ages, I think it was 20 and 34, in places like Windsor, even places like Windsor, Ontario, are living with their parents. I think a lot of what's going to happen is that, yeah, the older folks might end up going into assisted living or whatever. I don't think the home goes on the market. I just think that the kids go from the basement to the first floor. So that effect is real, and that is going to happen. That there is this kind of demographic bubble. There's a lot of those suburban neighborhoods that were built in the 1980s. My parents live in one. My dad's 78. We are going to see a lot of generational turnover in those markets, but I don't necessarily think that's going to cause like a glut of them to come on. Unless we see this government or future governments tap down on immigration further, or tap down on international student growth or other non-permanent. If that happens, if our population, we go from 300,000, 400,000, and we were close to 500,000 at one point, immigration target. If some future government decides to tamp that down to like 150,000 or so, then yeah, that might happen. But I think in general, it's the effect that you described is real. It's going to happen, but I think it can be the impact of that could be overstated, just because there's so many, again, kids living in their parents' basement or kids living in a condo, whatever, that it's going to end up inheriting these homes.
Does your plan call for falling prices?
Well, it's not really planned, and I don't think.
Implied in your presentation is that there's no way we can solve the problem based on the number of years it takes to own, unless prices fall. And I somehow suspect that those who are homeowners here and in the broader community and the condo developers here, probably not a thrilling message to hear if that's the case.
Yeah, well, I think, I suppose I'm the benefit of not having to worry about getting elected, so I can say these things. Yeah, I don't see a path forward without that. Now, on the condo developer and homeowner side, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't, you're going to not build new units or not make money. I think the key from an industry point of view is all on this cost of delivery crisis, that costs have to fall more than prices fall. And then you're going to get new supply come on. I think that's the challenge, right? Because I understand people say that, well, if prices fall, doesn't that eliminate the incentive to build more? I mean, yes, all else being equal, absolutely. But I think you need to get, the answer to that is you need to have falling costs. From the homeowner's perspective, I get it. I'm a homeowner who paid way too much for a home back in 2017. I get that. But I don't think there's any way around that. Now, I will say the price impacts will not be necessarily proportional, right? It's not that all homes will go down equally. For example, I think if, as a country, if we could really figure out how to get the kind of missing middle density of, small, like fourplexes, small apartments, and so on, I think you would actually see in many places, particularly kind of downtown, thinking like your cabbage towns here in Toronto, I actually think you'd see home prices go up, right? Because there would be, and it's not because of the home, but the underlying land, right? That people would want to, buy up those homes, tear them down, and put new ones. So those homes might actually appreciate. But the challenge is that if you start building those fourplexes, those small apartments, whatever, where you start to see downward price pressure is on the condo market. It is because then it becomes a substitute. It's like, okay, I could buy this 2-bedroom condo in a high rise, or I could get this 3-bedroom, 1/4 of a fourplex. So I do think if, we bent the cost curve and we started building more supply, I think prices in general, would have to fall, but the effects would be very uneven, right? And in some cases, you might actually see prices, for some housing types in some geographies, it actually might cause home prices to rise. But it's going to be very uneven and very messy.
Hi, Mike. David Graham from Halifax. I'm a builder. Atlantic Developments is my company. We have built, we've done land development. We've put the infrastructure in for land development. We've built middle and missing, I guess, housing, 50-unit condominium projects. And we were able to sell the condos at a much lower price than we can make a profit on today. At $800 a foot, we can't make money selling condos when we could do that at half the price 10 years ago. I'm worried about the inflationary effects of build. I'm grateful for the enthusiasm that the federal government has in terms of trying to solve complex housing systems issues and whatnot. But how does the private sector, and it occurs to me that there are a lot of private sector people in the room here, how do they galvanize and come together with a supply side commission, the likes of what they have in Australia as an example, to try to encourage building such that you can have the number of homes on an annual basis meet the immigration and the foreign student and temporary worker populations, and have a commensurate labor skill target, such that we can be building those homes. And how does the private sector get involved in the conversation to improve housing outcomes?
It's a great question, and it's something I've been. I actually just had a meeting this morning about that kind of thought. I think industry is going to have to do it itself. I think we are going to have to sort of figure out how to bring people together and kind of row in the same direction. And it's one of the reasons why I tend to focus, because you're absolutely right on the inflation piece. You're 100% correct, and it's why I am increasingly, in our team at MMI, are increasingly focused in thinking about this in terms of cost rather than supply, right? That we should be trying to figure out how to cut the cost of delivery, and then if you do that, the supply happens, right? But if you just focus on supply without focusing on the cost side, then it's you get that inflation thing, and you can't find a plumber or somebody to do ductwork. So I do think having industry coming together, focus on costs, and go, okay, well, where can we bend the cost curve? And I do think the federal government is thinking in terms of that. I think it's driving what the Prime Minister is talking around factory-built homes and panelization and so on. So then it's like, okay, well, if that's going to be part of the solution, then what are all the sort of policy levers that you need to get there? And that's going to be, standardization of building codes across provinces. It's I think what we saw just last week from the Premier and the provincial government saying, like, hey, we can't really be having different rules and regulations at a municipal level for various things, because it kills the ability to do economies of scale. The example I like to say is, what would car manufacturing look like if the city of Mississauga required all gas tank doors to be on the driver's side, Brampton said they had to be on the passenger side, and Caledon said they had to be behind the bumper, right? We couldn't mass produce cars, right? We'd be having to bespoke everything, and that's essentially what's happening in housing. So I do think that's what the federal government is thinking through, is trying to sort of think through, okay, how can we accelerate factory-built homes, help build address the cost curve, deal with some of these labor shortages in the trades. But you have to go, okay, well, what are all the barriers preventing that from happening? And once you start to get in the weeds, it's a whole lot of regulatory barriers that I think all three orders of government are going to have to address. I think that's it. I don't know. I've got a blinking red light here. I assume that meant I'm just waiting for the hook to pull me off the stage here. We good to go? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.